Well, my name's Bill Ashcroft, and I'm a founding theorist of a field called postcolonial studies. Published The Empire Writes Back in 1989 with two colleagues, and I've published several books in that field since then. And I've been invited to this literary festival in that role to discuss issues about Indian literature in the world and what is Indian literature, and to generally provide an opinion from a non-writer about these issues. Indian literature is a subject of considerable discussion and debate at the moment, and of course a lot of people say, well, you can't talk about one form of Indian literature, such as literature in English as Indian. My perception is very simple. I think Indian literature is literature written by Indians about India. They may be Indians living abroad, but they can be writing in English or writing in various other languages. English literature, like Indian literature, is multiple. So we talk about English literatures these days, and so we should talk about Indian literatures, because we have a very rich variety of vernacular literatures that are published within India. But I would say that Indian writing in English has made an enormous impact on the world, enormous impact globally. Taking hold of a global language has meant that Indian writers have been able to talk about themselves and about India, to talk about those things that mean most to them in a global context, and this has been a very powerful thing. Indian literature has, I would say, a greater impact on the global understanding of the spread of English literature than almost any other. Now, this is a question that is on a lot of people's minds at the moment, and of course the key feature of this is Salman Rushdie, a man who had to go into hiding because of Satanic Verses, a book which criticised Margaret Thatcher's Britain far more than it insulted the Khomeini regime. But Salman Rushdie is an interesting case because although he lives in Britain, or did at that time, he writes about India, and India is in his heart, as I've said to a number of people, and he has perhaps done more than many other writers to put India into the minds of a global audience since Midnight's Children in 1980. I would say also that his view of India is so indigenous that many Indians asked him after he wrote several of his books, particularly The Moor's Last Sigh, how did you know so much about Bombay? And I think Bombay is a place he grew up in, and it was very much in his soul, in his consciousness. So I think that it doesn't necessarily make any difference if a writer lives abroad and is writing about India. What usually happens is that writer will begin to write about things that affect the diaspora, things that affect people that have moved away from their home, and the particular ways in which they have to negotiate their identity in a different cultural framework. Now, certainly Rushdie does this, but he does it in an interesting way, because always at the back of his mind is the reality of India and Indian roots. And I think this is an interesting thing that prompts us to be cautious about simple global ideas of centre and periphery, because Indian writers like Rushdie have, although they see identity forming in a state of mobility in the global metropolis, nevertheless has still a very strong perception of the need to locate oneself in an Indian context. So this is the the usual ambivalence of the diasporic or migrant writer. And as Rushdie once said, the translation comes from moving across that term, and he believes that something must be gained as well as lost in that movement. So Indian writers occupy a lot of interesting positions in terms of global visibility in English literature in particular. Well, this of course is a very much debated question. Postcolonial refers to the engagements of those writers who have been formerly colonised with imperial power. Now, it doesn't mean after colonisation, because in some respects colonialism never ends. It doesn't mean a kind of state of being. It's above all a way of reading. It's a way of reading the engagements of those writers with the continuation of imperial power in all its forms. And that's why the term or the theory itself continues to develop and transform as writers develop and change under the pressure of an increasingly mobile and globalised world. So it's a way of reading rather than any kind of ontological description of either literature or people. But it does have its a very specific historical origin in colonialism, and not just British colonialism, but European colonialism, and the ways in which writers have engaged that form of power by appropriating the technologies, such as writing, such as language, and transforming them to work for themselves. So it's a very interesting field in which we see writers who appear to have been oppressed, who have taken hold of those things that have oppressed them. For instance, made to learn English, made to write English, but they take those things and completely transform them. That's one of the most exciting aspects of postcolonial theory and postcolonial studies. It shows the way in which writers, which people, and which colonised locations and societies can empower themselves and right back to the centre. Yeah, I think the nuances of the continuation of imperial power are very interesting. We don't see so much the direct engagement with British imperialism, but it's always there. It's always there on the horizon of people's consciousness. The idea that, for instance, that Nehru came up with about India having existed since time immemorial as a single nation, that's a post-colonial phenomenon. India was a variety of different cultures and nations, but these things continue to percolate through the society, and particularly the philosophy of Hind Swaraj, which Gandhi used to combat the British, you see that filtering into people's consciousness, particularly into writers' consciousness today. So there's, amongst writers, there's a very strong sense of the complexity of their identity. On one hand being grounded in Bharat, on the other being open to the world. And what we find Indian writers demonstrating is these things are not incompatible, that you can be grounded and yet mobile. And that's one of the most interesting aspects of our study of diasporic writing. Well, as a category, vernacular literature covers a lot of languages, and no, I don't think it's necessarily different at all. These literatures will be dealing with issues of a changing society, the issues of modernity, those things that writers in English deal with. The question is, of course, for India, will these how is the world going to hear about these writers or read these writers if they're not translated? And I've been thinking about this in terms of, say, the Russian novel. You know, we have the Russian novel translated, and I wonder if, you know, it wouldn't be a good idea to try to find a canon of vernacular literatures in India to translate and to offer to the world. Translation is the next big thing. I mean, it's been there for quite a while, and Indian academics and writers are very keen to talk about translation and to translate vernacular literatures into global languages, but not much has happened yet. And it would be interesting to see if the great claims that Indian authors make for vernacular literatures could be supported by translations that could be read by a wide audience. Well, I think that last thing was something it's been on my mind, that I just think that Indian writers and critics, Indian intellectuals, should not sell their writers in English short, because the one thing I would say is that Indian writing in English has made an incredibly powerful global impact, and it has opened up India in very interesting ways to readers of English. So I wouldn't sell them short, but on the other hand, I'd say that there is a need in India for the translation of really powerful vernacular texts. I think everybody would benefit from this. Well, that book was written a long time ago, and people keep attaching my name to it, even though it was written 23 years ago now. But this was a book that basically talked about the ways in which language is repositioned, theory is replaced, and the way in which post-colonial or formerly colonised societies have adopted and adapted a language to write to the world. Now, what it does is provide critics and readers with a literary theoretical language to understand not just Indian writing, but writing by formerly colonised people throughout the world. So it was the first step in this field. But I've written since then, of course, Postcolonial Transformation, On Postcolonial Futures, Caliban's Voice, and the same authors of The Empire Writes Back have written key concepts in postcolonial studies and the Postcolonial Studies Reader. Now, these have been extremely popular in the teaching of the field, and I'd encourage people to look at those books that I've written since The Empire Writes Back.